Hi everybody, welcome back, glad you could tune in again. We're continuing our journey through this great little book, Solomon Says by Mark Horne. We're getting to chapter 2 today. This book just gets better and better. This chapter is called The Genesis of Adulthood. Let me share with you a few thoughts about it. The title of the chapter itself is kind of pointing in two directions at once. Genesis in the sense of origins, which is what the word means. This is the chapter about where adulthood comes from, where we must search to find its origins. And of course it's a hint at the book of Genesis, the scriptural book of Genesis, which, as I've mentioned a few times in previous videos, has close thematic and theological and pastoral ties with the book of Proverbs. Proverbs and Genesis are closely related books, and this book, Mark's book, is all about Proverbs, but in order to understand Proverbs, then we need to understand a bit about Genesis. Let's just think about that connection for a minute or two. Mark points out one obvious connection, and this is really fascinating to think about. You remember back in the book of Genesis, there are two trees in the garden in Genesis chapter 2. There's the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Of course, Adam and Eve were not supposed to eat at that stage of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They were supposed to eat of the tree of life. Well, Proverbs chapter 3, verse 18 says, wisdom is a tree of life to those who lay hold on her. So you can imagine yourself bringing these two themes together and thinking, okay, in due time, Adam and Eve were supposed to eat of the tree of life. Well, how do we lay hold of the tree of life now? Proverbs tells us. It tells us that we lay hold of wisdom in order to lay hold of the tree of life. And of course, the book of Proverbs tells us how that wisdom is to be acquired. So that's one connection. The other connection, which is really obvious once you start to think about it, because Proverbs is such a practical book, goes back to the so-called creation mandate, or sometimes called the dominion mandate. That's what Mark calls it sometimes in Genesis 1:26 to 28. God blessed them, said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over it, and so on. And so what's going on in Proverbs is telling us how to accomplish that. And remember in a previous video I mentioned that one of the things, perhaps the most important thing that we must rule over is ourselves. We can't rule the creation without first ruling our own desires. Okay, so where does this chapter take those ideas? Well, Mark points out that both in Genesis and in the book of Proverbs, two key themes emerge as areas in which we need to pursue this dominion over the creation. And those two themes are marriage and work. We need marriage, obviously, to fill the world. No one person, male or female, can do that on their own. And we need work in order to subdue the world. To subdue things outside of ourselves, we need to work in the world. And so it's no accident then, given the connections between Proverbs and Genesis, and the creation narrative in particular, that the book of Proverbs should be filled, especially in the opening few chapters, with wisdom about marriage and with wisdom about work. So think, for example, Proverbs chapter 5, the warning against adultery. That's an exhortation from the wise father to the growing son to pursue marriage with a faithful woman rather than just pursuing your own selfish and foolish and fleeting desires for that kind of gratification without the commitment of marriage. Similarly, work. We're to pursue hard work and not to follow our own desires into laziness and sloth and so on. There's a great couple of sections in page 23, 24 about the perversion of work, where it becomes dishonest. And instead of working hard to create wealth to support yourself, rather like Paul says in his letters to the Thessalonians, instead we're working hard to try and find ways of stealing other people's wealth. So that's how work can be twisted. Of course, work can also be twisted by just not doing any of it. Another way that things can go wrong. The chapter unfolds. There's a long quotation towards the end from Christian philosopher and theologian Cornelius Van Til, which is dense, but it's worth looking at. Page 29 through 31, really worth exploring that. One of the things that Van Til is highlighting is that the mission given to humanity to transform the world is also a mandate for humans themselves to be transformed more into God's likeness. Again, relates to what we were talking about previously. We have no hope at all of subduing the world unless we have subdued our own desires, which means growing in Christ likeness and godliness. So there's all that stuff in that chapter. I encourage you you once again, consider getting a hold of this great book and let's read it together. And I'm sure men, women, old and young will find many, many helpful things for us in terms of growing in our relationship with Christ and seeking to serve him more faithfully. Okay, God bless you all. Be praying for you and hope by God's grace to see you all very soon. Bye for now.